Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about how to add a twist to your cornbread. I will provide some tips about how to maximize flavor even with recipes that you currently use. I will offer several suggested recipes that I like, and I will provide some suggestions for variations on cornbread that you can either look for in different recipes to try, or that you could try adjusting in your own favorite recipe. When it comes to flavor, one thing to think about is the kind of cornmeal that you use. White cornmeal is more delicate and yellow cornmeal has a stronger flavor, but it's also sweeter as a result. Some recipes call for one or the other, and you can look for recipes that call for your preference or try a different one to see which one you like better. Some just call for cornmeal in general, like one of the recipes I'm going to suggest here. And in those cases, you could pick the one that you would prefer. Another thing to think about is there is always dairy in cornbread recipes, unless you are making a vegan recipe. Richer dairy, like eggs, a fuller fat milk, butter, and cheese are going to enhance the flavor and the texture more. And if you are using a vegan recipe, then I recommend using oat or cashew milk for a richer flavor. You can also use recipes that call for a little bit of olive oil or vegetable oil instead of maybe butter. But if you've still got eggs, milk, and maybe cheese in your cornmeal, then you're going to get that rich flavor that the fat in the dairies offers. Another thing to think about is the kind of sugar. Many recipes, like one that I will offer here, call for just cane sugar, and that's fine. I like less sugar in my cornmeal, so I tend to prefer recipes that don't call for as much, because cornbread is a savory food. And so I don't like it to be super sweet. The other thing, though, is not just the amount, but the kind of sweetener that you're using. If you have a recipe that calls for cane sugar, for example, you could substitute dark brown sugar, especially because a darker sweetener is not only going to provide some sweetness that will enhance the taste, but it will also provide a little bit richer color to your cornbread. And then finally, another possibility is to add 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric into your dry ingredients, because this will help to enhance the color. The curcumin that is in turmeric and makes it orange is a fat-soluble substance, and so the fact that you are baking it with oils, even plant-based milks like cashew milk or oat milk or dairy, is going to bring out the flavor and the color of turmeric. So it won't be a very strong flavor. You probably won't even notice flavor-wise. It might just give it a little bit more of a complex flavor taste-wise, but you will get a richer color if you add a little turmeric. So one recipe that I am suggesting is actually available online, but I've provided a copy here along with the link information at the bottom of the recipe. This is Better Homes and Gardens. And the reason I like this recipe, one, it's low in added sugar. As I've said, I don't like a lot of sugar, and it calls for cane sugar, but you could use dark brown sugar for more color. It's also rich in dairy fats, so you're going to get a nice flavor and texture. And then it calls for chilies, and I like to have some heat in my cornbread. If you don't like a lot of heat, it's an adjustable heat level, so that's really helpful if you are trying to explore different things but are a little wary of something very hot. And having the dairy in the cornbread as well as the sugar is going to help to reduce the heat a little bit. So unless you use very hot chilies, you're not going to get a super hot cornbread. So one thing you can do is just choose very mild chilies if you are using fresh chilies like Fresno, Anaheim, or Hatch, or you can go with something hot if you like hot, like a jalapeno or a habanero or cayenne. And if you're using canned jalapenos like the recipe suggests, you have the option of mild, medium, or hot, depending on where you shop and what your options are. The other thing about canned jalapenos is that they are pickled, and pickling them in vinegar brine actually helps to subdue the flavor just a little bit, so they're not going to be quite as hot. And then you can also make sure that you avoid seeds, because keeping chili seeds in what you make will impart more heat. So avoiding those seeds will reduce the heat. So this is a nice, easy cornbread recipe, but it's got jalapenos added to it to make it something with a twist. Another recipe that I suggest if you like spicy things is a masala cheddar cornbread recipe in a book called The Flavor Equation, which you can get from Cumberland County Library System. It's also available on Overdrive if you don't want to borrow the print book, or if the print copy is unavailable and you'd like to try for the Overdrive copy. The page number here is based on the print copy, but you can certainly search up, if you do the Overdrive copy, the name of the cornbread, masala cheddar cornbread. You'll find it either in the index or through a quick search or in the table of contents. Even if you don't try this recipe because you're not big on very spicy, it's worth looking at the recipe because the author talks about the ingredients that are in the recipe and how they work together with each other to enhance the flavor of the cornbread. Different ingredients are important for nice texture, others are important for flavor, taste, some are important for aroma. And so knowing how these things work can not only help you with this recipe, but with any cornbread recipe that you might choose to try. I actually made this recipe earlier this week, and this is what's left, not much. It was a really tasty recipe, and the texture was really nice. And as you can see, one of the things that it calls for you to do is to fold some grated sharp cheddar cheese into the batter once the batter is fully mixed. And there's some cheddar cheese that ends up on top, which means that in the baking process, you get some browning on top, which is nice for, especially when it's fresh from the oven, you get that crispy texture on top. It does have a kick to it, depending on what kind of peppers you put in it, because it calls for ground cayenne as well as red chili pepper flakes. But you could always omit those or reduce them if you'd like to try the recipe but are afraid that it might be too hot for you. Another cookbook I recommend that's available through Cumberland County Library System, though only through the print copy, there's no Overdrive copy, is the Better Homes and Gardens New Baking Book. It's a bit dated at this point, late 1990s, but I have it on my shelf and I go to it a lot, especially this time of year when I'm baking for the holidays. And there are two cornbread recipes, one that calls for Parmesan cheese and one that's just a basic cornbread that's nice. And then there are two corn muffin recipes, both of which call for different kinds of cheese. So those are worth looking into as well if you're trying different recipes. I have tried several of these recipes for cornbread and corn muffins in this cookbook, and I like them a lot. Other things you can think about with your own recipes, or perhaps as you look at these recipes and others and decide what you'd like to try. The flavor equation actually calls for you to add sweet corn, whole sweet corn to the recipe. So that's something you could do. Even if you don't try that recipe, you could try it with another recipe. Just fold in some sweet corn before you spoon the batter into the pan, and that will add some texture and sweetness to your recipe. You can also fold in 1/2 to 1 cup pepper jack or some other kind of cheese like smoked cheddar or Gouda that will give it a smoky flavor or a bit of heat. You don't even need to add other ingredients like actual chilies if you have a pepper jack cheese. You can also add a pinch or more of cayenne or chili pepper flakes instead of fresh chilies or canned chilies. And you can sprinkle things on top for additional texture. Nuts, seeds, some cornmeal, some shredded cheese like the flavor equation recipe that had some grated cheddar on top and it turned nice and brown and crispy. You can add grated Parmesan, or if you go vegan, you can put some nutritional yeast on top. That would give it a little bit of that Parmesan-like flavor. And then baking in a cast iron skillet is another way to go. That makes it a Southern style. And the Better Homes and Gardens recipe that I offered here suggests that you do that recipe in the cast iron skillet. So there are many recipes for cornbread. You might have your own out there, but you can go ahead and explore and think about the ideas that I've offered here today. Pay attention to things like sweeteners, both what kind and how much. You don't necessarily need much sweetener, but you do need a little bit, and the kind of sweetener you use can make a difference. And then some recipes will call for more wheat flour than cornmeal, while others call for equal parts. That's something to think about too, because more wheat flour and less cornmeal, especially if you are using yellow cornmeal, means that you will have a more delicate bread. But as I said, you could also choose white cornmeal and it will make it delicate, but also give you the corn flavor. And then there are plenty of vegan recipes that you can find out there. And if you think about that richness factor, you can substitute oat milk or cashew milk if they don't already call for that. And then that will give you a richer flavor and texture than if you use something that is maybe a bit less fatty. I hope that there have been some helpful tips here and that you're able to enjoy some different ways of making cornbread.